Now, I haven't uploaded anything to this channel in something like a decade, but I was just reading the reports about gold going to all-time highs, and it was enough to distract me from doing any kind of work, to spend the last hour or so doing some sums to work out what has been the best investment over the last 10 years. So if that sounds like something that might interest you, this is what I'm going to be talking about for the next 10 or so minutes. Now, these calculations that I've done are pretty crude and by no means are going to be completely accurate, and I probably could have done most of this using AI and ChatGPT, whatever, but you know, I'm a bit of a geek, so I like sitting there and looking at numbers and trying to work out various bits and bobs. So there's bound to be some inconsistencies and things that I've got a little bit wrong. But with that in mind, I thought it would be interesting to compare some of the investments that everyday people like you and me can get involved with to try and get a return on our investment. So I have compared and contrasted a couple of things. And obviously, there are lots of things that people can invest their money in with a view to making money back. I've gone for the classics of the current period. Okay, so let's look at the first one. I'm going to talk about Bitcoin and crypto, even though it really isn't fair, because the brutal truth is that Bitcoin is the massive winner. It's over the last 10 years. It's obvious it's been the massive winner because, 10 years ago, a Bitcoin was worth less than £300. Now it's worth over £90,000. So let me just preface this. Everything I'm going to talk about, I'm going to use pounds rather than dollars, even though, loads of people like use dollars or whatever, being universal. I worked all these sums out in pounds. So that's what we have got. Okay. So as I say, 10 years ago, 2015, no one really knew about Bitcoin. It was about and whatnot, but the vast majority of people didn't know about Bitcoin, and people that say they did are probably lying. Okay, but the charts basically tell us that it was worth about £300 per Bitcoin. Most people really started getting interested in Bitcoin about 2017 when it started getting into the thousands. Okay, in 2000s. Into the 3,000 winter of 2017, right? But here's the brutal truth, from 2015 to today, there's a 30,000% increase. It's ridiculous and laughable, right? In the last 5 years, from it being 8,800, it's 10x'd. You've got nearly 1,000% increase there. Now I've added last year. I haven't done this with any of the other concepts, but I wanted to add this in because of the fact that Bitcoin isn't really a fair fight. But last year, only last year, 50,000. Let me just add another row there. 50,000, and it's kind of almost doubled in a year. Again, it's just showing the volatility of basically most of these investments. So even based on last year, 82% increase, okay, an 82% return, okay, on what you could have invested, right? So if we just think about the mechanics of this in the first instance, if you were to buy one Bitcoin, you'd obviously have fees, okay? So this is something I'm going to try and introduce into each of these instances, but if you'd bought a Bitcoin for 8.8, you would have probably had something like 176 in fees. Not too much in the grand scheme of things. So instead of you getting your profit from 5 years, so I did this one from 5 years ago, you got your 934% return. It's reduced it down to 913%. Okay, so as I say, I wanted to include Bitcoin, even though it isn't necessarily a fair fight. There is massive volatility in the whole space. We don't really know where it's going to be in, the truth is we don't know where any of these things are going to be in a year's time, 2 years time, 5 years time. The whole world could be like The Walking Dead in a couple of years, and we could, we could be trying to barter with, scraps of stuff that we've got. Who knows, right? And what I always think about is, you get a lot of people talking about, I've got gold and silver in terms of, if the world goes to whatever, if you're trying to fight over a loaf of bread, and you've got a silver coin, it doesn't really matter. Right, so let's move on to property. I just included this, even though data's more tricky to get by and working the sums out, obviously a lot more difficult, and it is very dependent upon where you are, wherever you are, okay? But using the land registry data, the average price of a property in the UK in 2015 was 186. In 2020, it'd gone up to 224, and approximately now the average price is 270. Now, obviously, this is the average over the course of across the entire country, but since 2015, you can see there's been a 45% increase. Since 2020, a 20% increase. Now, those figures are going to be drastically different depending on where you are in the country. Some will have seen a lot less. Some areas would have seen significantly larger percentages. Okay, but obviously with property, it's different because you're going to buy it over, a mortgage of 25 to 30 years. The amount of fees, interest that you are going to pay, you aren't really going to see a return on your property. That's the brutal truth, okay? Because of the money you'll spend in interest and fees over the years, even if it kind of doubles, you're probably, over the course of a 25, 30 year mortgage, you are throwing so much, at these mortgage companies that it really needs, it needs even 45% probably isn't enough to, of a profit to cover everything that you will give to obtain that property. But, you've got the security of owning that property. That's the brutal truth of it, the security. That's what we love about property. Now, let's start talking about things that we can really get our teeth into. Let's talk about stocks and shares. Everyone loves stocks and shares. They've obviously seen massive increases in the last couple of years. Now, what I've decided to choose the S&P because it's globally known. Everyone knows about it. Everyone knows that it's generally been pretty successful over the last, forever, basically. It's gradually been going up. There has been volatility over the years. There's been drops and, whatever. But over the period of time, it has gradually gone from strength to strength to strength. And if you look at the calculations that I put in place, like before, 2015, the unit price. Now, this is just the unit price of the S&P. Like, when you go and buy the S&P, you can buy it from some different providers, different price units and whatnot. But this is kind of the data, when you actually search for the S&P, right? So 2000. So these pounds might not be correct. It might be that I looked at that in dollars, but it it is what it is, right? For the purposes of what we're talking about, right? 2020 gone up to 3,500, and in 2025 6,750, right? So over the 10-year period, you've got a 237 return. Over the last 5 years, a 92% return, right? So if we just look at the example, you've obviously got the cost of the fund, you've got the entry charge fee for purchasing the fund, and then an ongoing charge. Now, obviously, there's lots of ways of doing these. In the UK, you can throw it in an ISA, and there will be, the fees will change. There's different ways of doing it, but I just thought let's just do the simple thing of just buying a fund, and you're paying the ongoing. You're paying the ongoing fee, right? And I haven't included the selling of any of these things. The cost of selling, forget about that for now. We're just talking about what it's kind of worth minus what we've paid to get to that point, right? So if we look at the investment 10 years ago, based upon these prices, if you wanted to do a £10,000 investment, you would have been able to get 5 units, right? then you would have paid the entry charge and the ongoing charge for 10 years. Let's just say hypothetically that's what it is. £12 and £100. So you would have to get your 10,000, you would have spent 10,112, right? Okay. Now 10 years later, those 5 units are now worth 33,750. So if we minus what we've actually spent, the profit there is 23,638, and that's an increase of 233. So you can see that it's, there's only a couple of percent difference in what you've got. You got a good value. You got good value from going with that. In the last 5 years, just to make it similar, you can see 5 years ago, your 10,000 would only have got you 3 units, right? So you had to spend 10,500 to get 3 units. You would have spent your £12 and then your 50 quid for 5 years of fees. As I say, these could be slightly different, but probably not too much difference, right? So you would have spent 10,562 to get you 3 units, which in today's market, those 3 units would be worth 20,000 minus your fees here. You've got your profit of 9,688, and that is a 91% uplift. So again, not too dissimilar to the inherent price of that. Okay, so you've got pretty good value. Okay, pretty good value, right? Now let's move on to our valuable metals. Okay, precious metals. So we're going to start with silver. To start with, love silver. It's so accessible to get in. You can get some fantastic pieces. It's tactile, and because you can get some decent sized pieces, it's quite impressive. And in terms of starting to get into investing, it's something I love to talk to people about. Okay, you're giving someone like a 10-ounce piece, looking at it and seeing it in their hands, and it's like the size of a coaster or whatever. That's exciting in terms of investing, and it's in your hands. It isn't just something on a spreadsheet or whatever, right? So the spot price of silver about 10 years ago was about £10. Okay. 5 years ago, it was about 19, and at the moment, it's around about 37, give or take, right? So in the last 10 years, 270% uplift. In the last 5 years, 94% uplift, right? So let's talk about a calculation, because it's a little bit different with silver. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is I'm talking about buying it in the UK and buying Silver Britannias. Now, Silver Britannias are capital gains tax exempt. Okay, so when you go to sell it, you don't have to worry about paying that kind of tax, if you sell in big quantities, right? Which obviously can be a little bit of a worry, particularly if prices continues to go up and the capital gains limit, or whatever, or the opposite of a limit, it drops even further and further. You're not going to have much of an allowance, right? So if we go with Silver Britannias, the difference with buying silver is there's always a decent premium. So you're always paying a bit extra on top of the spot price, okay, for the design of the product or whatever it might be, right? But you're also paying VAT. You're also paying VAT for silver. So as you can see, you're going to buy your silver, okay, but you've got a 10% premium. I've decided to choose 10% as an example. I appreciate this can change wildly depending on different factors over different years. But for the purpose of this calculation, I've gone with about 10%, right? I've gone with about 10%. And then the VATs are 20% on top of that. Okay. So if you think about this, right? So if you wanted to get £10,000 worth of silver, right? Back in 2015, 10,000 would have got you 1,000 coins, 1,000 1-ounce Britannia coins, right? 1,000, right? However, In order to get those 1,000 coins, you had to pay these fees. So the premium might have been around about 1,000, right? And then your VAT on top of that would have been 20%, right? So you're looking at paying another 3,200 in order to get that. So your total price to get £10,000 worth of silver was actually 13,200 plus your shipping. Okay, I've not included shipping. Who knows what shipping is, right? So let's talk about the profit, okay? Because the price of silver has obviously gone from 10 to 37. So your 10,000 is now worth 37. So you've got 37,000 pounds worth of silver. You've made a profit of 23,800. But because you've got these fees here, you've actually only got 180% uplift, okay, because of those fees with regards to silver. Now, likewise, if we look at it over the last 5 years, if you wanted to get your 10,000, you would only have been able to get about 530 coins. I think I messed up this calculation, but, it is what it is. 10,000, you would have got 530. You would have paid the same fees in terms of, what you had there. And obviously your shipping, and obviously over the last 5 years, your 10,000's basically doubled, from 10 to 19. So your 19,610, you spent, this much to get it. So you've kind of made a profit there of 6,000, and you've seen an uplift of 47% based upon 94 of the actual raw material price. Okay, now let's just move on to gold, because that's what everyone is talking about this week. Huge excitement in the space, and what we can see here in terms of gold is 10 years ago, £750 an ounce. £750 an ounce. It's now 3,000 plus, right? That's the crazy thing, right? 5 years ago, again, 1,400. So in 10 years, 300%, and in 5 years, 114%. Now let's look at the calculation for gold, because the calculation for gold is slightly different. Okay, we're not paying VAT on gold, and the premiums are lower. Okay, so there's instantly more value. Okay. But obviously significantly more expensive to obtain gold and obtain more of it. Okay. So let's talk about, we'll go with the same example of utilizing Gold Britannias, their capital gains exempt, which is pretty cool. And we were talking about the premiums. I'm going to put 5% here. Now, at the present moment, the premiums are not 5%. They are much lower than that, but these vary all the time. And I just decided that I would use 5%, just for the purposes of this, right? Okay. And obviously, if you believe that the premiums have been even lower over the last 10 years, the calculation is going to be even more beneficial here, right? So an investment in 2015, you could have got 14 coins for 10,500. Okay, you would have paid a premium of 525. So you would have ultimately paid 10,525 in total. And over the course of the last 10 years, because of this incredible surge that we've seen, those 14 coins would be now worth 42,000. You've spent your 10,000. That means you've made a profit of 31. Okay. And because you've only, the premium is only 5%, there wasn't VAT on this, your actual uplift is almost as good as the actual price of gold. Okay. Which is pretty good. And when you talk about the premiums, if you were to then sell this on, these Gold Britannias, they may retain the premium with you selling as well. Maybe not as much, who knows? Some Britannias the selling on premium down the line may increase, but you may not lose too much, and as this is pretty close to spot, you're in a good place. Okay. So in terms of 5 years ago, for your 10,000, you would have been able to get 7 coins, would have been just under 10,000, and then you would have paid 490. So that's a total of 10,290 plus shipping. Those 7 coins would now be worth 21,000, which is a profit of 10,200 and a profit of 10,710, which would be 104% uplift based upon the raw materials being 114. Okay, so really what you can see here is when we talk about the profits of everything, just to summarize it, obviously Bitcoin blows it out of the way, but most people didn't really know about Bitcoin in 2015. Okay, most people were scared to even buy it 5 years ago. Okay, most people were really scared to buy it even 3 years ago. Okay, and that's the brutal truth. Okay, so there has been significantly smaller gains where it's been accessible to the average person. Okay, with regards to property, there is less gains, but it is security, and obviously property is property. Okay, in terms of the S&P 500, it's very similar. It's very similar to gold, in my brutal opinion. You're talking about over the last 10 years, multiple hundreds of percent. In the last 5 years, 100%. You obviously have ongoing fees, but they're not too drastic. And because it is tracking 500 of the best countries in the USA, the likelihood is that it is going to continue to grow, I suspect. No guarantees, obviously, but that is what it is. In terms of silver and gold, if we clarify these, I mean, as I kind of said, silver, it's a great introductory investment piece. I love investing in silver, but the returns have shown that gold is where it is. Now, with that in mind, the last few weeks of incredible growth, and that has distorted. It's distorted both mediums, to be fair, both metals, to be perfectly honest. But something that I think that probably not a lot of people really, or some people that are new to it or don't know enough about precious metals, will not consider the overall premium of purchasing silver. Right now you can buy, silver's £37 approximately. But if you wanted to just buy 1 silver ounce Britannia, it is way over 50. Way over £50. Okay, might cost you £52, right? Whereas if you wanted to buy gold, okay, gold's worth about 3,000. You can probably get an ounce of that for under 3,100. Okay, so pro rata, you are buying it at its much truer value. Much truer value. Now, what I would say, just to kind of summarize it, all of this is massively volatile. Everything that you invest in, it really doesn't matter whether you're investing in gold, stocks, trading cards, whatever it might be. Okay, secondhand VHSs or something. These markets are completely volatile based upon things political and in different countries all around the world, the money markets and different business and trends and how things are affecting, all of this sort of stuff. I'm not really going to go into it, but the truth is everything's volatile and everything could be gone in a second. Things could drastically drop. So you should appreciate that when you make any investment in any market, any medium, whatever. Always consider that you can afford to take the hits if suddenly tomorrow there is a 50% drop in the value of what it is you've invested in. So that's what I'm going to wrap this up. As I said, I haven't put a video on this channel for a decade. It was just like I was sitting here whilst I was, I got distracted from doing any sort of real work, and I thought, you know what? Let's just do a few calculations and have a bit of fun. And then I thought, you know what? Let's just make a video and waffle on about it, because I like to waffle. So if you have got this far in this video, let me know. Let me know that you got to the end waffle. And maybe I will be back soon with some more videos. If I'm going to put more videos on this channel, it'll probably be more videos like this. Okay, talking about the investment potential of certain bits and pieces. So have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you later.